I I'm super glad that we are managed to finally do it because we talked with Anastasia for some time to invite her and feature her work because we all super appreciate it. But also today, as we were preparing to do this broadcast, I was also thinking a lot about storytelling and Ukrainians who are doing storytelling and journalists like myself, especially on these days. Unfortunately, this morning we woke up to a lot of rocket attacks on our cities and our homes, including my own home city. And for the first time in my life, I find myself in a very weird situation because for almost 20 years since I'm doing journalism, telling the stories of my own people and the places I come from was a very good way for me to deal with a lot of complicated issues or with a lot of injustices that I would face. But this is for the first time, some of the information that you have to share is you kind of need to filter it because you got to consider a lot of security risks, and it kind of robs you an opportunity to tell the story in full because you have to think about your loved ones first and their security. But it doesn't mean that those stories disappear or they're not existing, especially for those parts of our families that are on occupied territories now. So this is where I think Anastasia is perfect to chat not only about journalism in times of war, but also storytelling by young Ukrainians. Anastasia, hey, you're with us.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I was just giving you guys the floor to properly introduce yourself. Can you hear me well?
Yes, it's perfect.
Great.
So, Anastasia, our really first
You can call
rule.
me Nastya, by the way. That's fine. That's preferred, actually.
Cool. So,
I
Nastya,
called you something even more unpreferable, which is the English way.
Yeah. we can get into that whole discussion about my name later. It's actually quite interesting for English speaking people to hear usually. But anyway, go on.
Well, this is a perfect then opportunity because our ground rule, we never introduce our guests and we allow them, encourage them to introduce themselves the way they want it.
I see.
So please tell us, especially, I mean, a lot of people probably here already know, aware of your work, but please introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, where you come from, and what your life has been since the genocide started.
Yeah. So, well, my name is Anastasiia, or shortly Nastya. So that's what everyone in Ukraine or Ukrainian Russian-speaking space would call me. So yeah, I definitely do not prefer Anastasia or Anastasia or whichever Western spin on that that people put. I am a national reporter at the Kyiv Independent, though for the last few months I haven't been as active with my reporting because I'm still in university. I'm 21. I just turned 21 a week ago, I think. So I've just been dealing with a lot of obviously with the war, and then also with work, and then also with school. But I've been with KI for with the newsroom for nearly 2 years now, I think, if not over 2 years, because of course I'm not sure how many people are aware of that, but we all started as the Kyiv Post. We were part of the Kyiv Post, and then there was this whole scandal, and we were all fired for defending our editorial independence, and we created the Kyiv Independent, a new media. So I've been with the team for a few years, and so I'm really excited to be here. I know Maksym and I have been trying to sort of plan this for a while, but something would always go wrong. But here we are. Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me.
It's war, so always have. But at the same time, it's been 19 days, but it feels like we just talked yesterday about it, since basically it's one.
The time flow right now is crazy, completely.
Yeah, for me it's like one long day.
Exactly. Exactly. I have a friend who posts on Instagram stories every day, like day 79 or day 80, and just kind of sums up what happened. And she's the only reason why I even know what day it is, because I don't keep track of it. But also every time I go and see those Instagram stories, I'm like, fuck, no way, it's already been that long, because when the war began, that was sort of my biggest fear, that this is gonna prolong and it's gonna be something that I have to learn to live with. I hated that idea. That was the last thing I wanted, and it was kind of like learning to live with it seemed to me like the most unjust thing or for people to expect of me and of other Ukrainians. But unfortunately, I mean, no matter how much I reject it, and no matter how much I don't want to, on a practical level, you just do. It's not something you control. So
yeah, you soldier on, especially if you're journalist, and this is something definitely part of the job. And by the way, I really wanted to ask you, because I know we chatted in private about it, comparing our experiences, because I was trying to remember, and I remember it still vividly, how we were struggling to get the word out during the 2014 and the first invasion, the Maidan revolution, and it was extra hard for Ukrainian journalists to be in English language space, to be recognized. And I told you that I'm overjoyed to see that this time around it's different, and finally Ukrainian
yeah,
voices like yourself get more
yeah.
exposure and more interest, and your work is more celebrated and amplified. Can you maybe share, as a young journalist, how exactly the experiences of Maidan and the years after Maidan shaped you as a journalist, and maybe even how you decided to become one?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, first of all, when Maidan happened, I was like 13 or something. I think I was like 12 or 13. I was tiny. But my family was definitely like millions of other families. We were taking active part in it. I still have photos of me, like 20-year-old sitting in her room in the middle of the night drawing posters that said, fuck you, Putin, or something. It's brilliant. I'm so glad I still have these memories. And I have memories of walking around Krishatik and going to the Kiev City Council, and my dad like lifting me up because I was so small, and I'm in general a tiny human now as well. I'm very short, but when I was a kid, my dad would have to lift me up so I could put the poster, on the Kiev City Council wall, and we would walk around with our family friends and do the whole thing. And I was there when the first million people showed up in Maidan. I remember walking as well with my dad and my mom near the Kiev City Council, and a bunch of titushkis showed up. So, I mean, I assume people know who those are, but basically just, a bunch of whatever criminals who are paid to stir up shit. So they showed up and started banging on the Kiev City Council like windows, and my instinct, because I'm curious and I want to see what's up, my instinct was to run and see what's happening. So my dad grabs me with both of his arms, being like, no, like, what are you doing, are you nuts? And he like pulls me out, and like I have these these vivid memories and these experiences. My mom was helping with the injured who were at the St. Michael's, one of the big churches in Kiev, where people would bring all of the injured from Maidan. My mom brought medicine there and stuff. So definitely all of this was a very important, part of my upbringing. This was something that was definitely a big part of my, Ukrainianness and my experience. My uncle, he went to Mohilanka, one of the top Ukrainian universities, very pro-Ukrainian, very patriotic. They had tents set up, so I'd have to watch, live streams at night, kind of trying to call him, making sure he's even alive because he was there. So yes, that was a very lengthy way to say that it has definitely affected me and how I perceive Ukraine. And I remember being like 13 and proudly calling myself a nationalist, not even knowing what that is. I mean, and, and people laughing at me because obviously I had no idea what I was saying.
Yeah.
So
I think you did at 13, and experiencing through all of that is still, you probably have more awareness than a lot of people who have been watching
yes,
all of this from the outside.
exactly. Like, to me, that just meant loving and defending your country, and to be honest, it still means that to me in our circumstance. But that should probably have a whole separate Twitter Spaces thing on
Yeah.
that term specifically. But yeah, so for me, being Ukrainian always meant defending, and it always meant fighting for something. It didn't just mean enjoying the goodness of your country. It meant that there is always this kind of threat, and you always have to nurture your Ukrainianness and your freedom, and your ability to organize pro-LGBTQ raves in front of the president's office, which is something that's completely unthinkable in our neighboring countries, in many of them. So that definitely informed what I am sort of growing into right now. But go ahead, Val.
No, I was just gonna say that it's about the values, right? Like the values that you grew up with that influence a lot of what you do.
And yeah, and I don't even remember, like, my parents never set me down and were like, okay, let's talk about having to like Ukraine or having to love your country. Like, no one, this was a completely unexplained thing. It was just a by default, you just see it, right? Because one day you can no longer go to school because there is smoke from the fires on Maidan, so you can breathe properly, or there are snipers on roofs. And I also went to school in Podil, which is like 5 minutes away from Maidan, so my lyceum was shut down. So all of these experiences, they may seem kind of not really that important, but now that I look back at it, I think I would be a completely different person if that didn't happen to me.
Throughout the war, we've all had to call out different sort of harmful narratives, harmful perspectives that some people in the West, and not just in the West, but in general outside of Ukraine, have had about Ukraine. And it has changed, from one day to another. It's something else and something different. But I was wondering if there was one thing right now that you think is most important in the work that you do. What is it? What is it that you want to be able to tell people is wrong in what they think about Ukraine and what's happening right now?
Well, first of all, is that, well, actually, there's no first of all. There's so many things. There's like a dozen things that I think are all equally crucial for people to understand, and I try to mention it at any sort of public appearance I do ever. But of course, one of them is that Ukrainians would never ever give up their territory. And anytime a friend of mine or a colleague from the West or a professor or whoever starts to have this discussion with me, I don't know whether to cry or to laugh or to yell at them, because I mean, like, it doesn't make sense to me at all, and it's crazy to me that there are people who actually think that that's an option that can be even hypothetically considered. And and now we go as far as to have the world's most famous and most powerful newspaper actively advocating for that option. I mean, so either we're all doing our job very wrong here from Ukraine, or or something is just utterly wrong with this, with the world. It's probably the latter, because imagining what part of America they would give up if they were under attack, or what part of France. People don't want to imagine that. They just want to impose kind of their least painful version of how this world would end in their eyes. So that's obviously one. And people have to understand that political decisions are not in Ukraine. So something that Zelensky does comes directly from what the people want. And for many people, that they don't see it this way, especially the Russians, obviously, because for them that's a completely separate society, and the government are completely separate. But for us, when we say that Zelensky would never advocate for that option, we say that because we know that as a society as a whole, we would never let him, because mayhem would happen if he actually actively advocated for it. And in our eyes, society, and people and the government are one. We are one organism that's working to defeat a common enemy. We're not these, two separate columns that are working, simultaneously. That's not how it works. So that's definitely one. Of course, the other one would be, you guys already know all of these things. I'm sure your audience does as well. But of course, the fact that this was never about NATO, and NATO has nothing to do with this, and NATO didn't provoke a thing, and the fact that Russia just can't stand free and democratic Ukraine, and they just can't stand that we've got millions of Russian speakers who despise Russia and who would die for Ukraine, and for them it's more realistic and appropriate and normal, to willing to give up their country rather than, live under Russian rule. Like, that's how much we do not want that. And that's how much we're different.
As a Russian-speaking Ukrainian, I totally
I'm also
second
Russian
that.
speaking.
Yay! Yes, absolutely.
Me too.
And actually, thank you for pointing out all of that. I think that despite that many people kind of hear about it, and we spend so many times debunking all of it, it's still out there. And if it's still out there, it means that we should keep talking about it. And
clearly,
I think absolutely. And I find your point very cool on this kind of colonial haze view of Ukraine from the West as well. When the many folks think Ukraine, then they not necessarily think democracy, and this is unfortunate. But also, it's a consequence of Russian disinformation and Russian colonial disinformation that basically erased so much knowledge, Western knowledge about Ukraine as an old democratic society with extremely old democratic roots going back centuries, and I think that's part that always surfaces up all the time. That basically Ukrainian society can teach a lot of fellow Europeans on democracy, not the vice versa.
absolutely.
Wanted to ask you one question like that is very important for me, and I saw how you shared a lot of information and pictures, heartbreaking pictures from Irpin, where your home was. And when I was looking at those and your reporting and what you were trying to tell the world about the atrocities that were done at the Russian occupation there, one question I always was wondering, as a Ukrainian journalist these days, we're often expected, especially by our Western colleagues, to aspire to these weird Western standards of objectivity, where the situation comes to reporting on something you really care about, your own home that was destroyed, your own people that died. How do you balance that out? And do you feel like those standards of so-called Western objectivity fair or even applicable to situations like that? How do you personally manage to report, stay on the story, but also make sure that you're human in all of it and share your own human emotions doing that?
I mean, a lot of people actually ask me this, and but I'm glad you did as well, because I do not think that I'm gonna be a more objective journalist or doing my job as a journalist better if every time I quote statistics from the Ukrainian government, I'm also gonna quote Putin himself or his government. I don't think that that's what objectivity means. I just mean that, that's spreading lies and, actually just taking up my word count in my article. Like, because, of course, I'm all for, nuanced analysis. I'm all for being open-minded. Of course, I don't want to, I don't know. I don't like censorship. I'm very liberal when it comes to information sharing and research, etc. But some things are just objectively wrong. And some things are just, overwhelmingly seen as evil. And whatever the Russian government says are those things. So, we were just, Kiai is working on making a podcast, which I'm going to be hosting with some of my girlfriends. And we were just having this discussion on one of the episodes we were recording about how when the war started, our newsroom had to very quickly make a decision of what are we going to call it? Are we going to call it a special military operation, or are we going to call it a war? And I interviewed shortly Oля, our chief editor, asking her, what her thinking there was. And she said it exactly right. She said, your job as a journalist is to report on the truth, so like actually open your eyes and see what's happening. You don't just copy paste someone's speeches or words. If he's saying that he's, saving people, but he's killing them, you have to report that he's killing them, because that's what's objectively happening. So, and that kind of applies to all of the reporting that Ukrainian journalists do, because, it's not, I don't think it's about necessarily staying objective, because I guess staying objective would mean like, being balanced in that way where you have to devote, 50% of the space to one side and 50% to the other. I would say that that's unfair. And as a journalist, I want to be a fair journalist. I don't want to be a quote unquote balanced one. I want to provide fair reporting so people see the story in a fair way. And of course, if people want to say that that's not, that I'm, that goes against objectivity or something, and, if they want to go and look at statistics from the Russian, defense ministry just for balance, go ahead, they can do that. But it's not going to affect the truth of what's happening on the ground. But I mean, of course, there is this whole, other avenue of course, reporting on your home being destroyed is, it's like, in another interview, I said, it's like, imagine your partner being raped and killed right in front of you, and that's exactly what's happening to our country. And that's also exactly what's happening to many people who have to actually do that literally, right? Because we've seen all of these stories from,
absolutely,
rape and stuff.
And I always, I mean, of course, this is my opinion based on my work, but I always feel when you really have a stake in the story, that's when your story comes out in the best shape possible, and the most strongest writing or reporting comes out of that place. When you have a stake in the story, when you care, it doesn't mean that you're automatically pushing for some narrative, but it means that your reporting will be honest and raw and powerful, and
exactly.
That's exactly what you're also doing. And I'm
super of course
grateful for that as well.
Oh, thank you. Of course, but I mean, we have to remember though that it's also a quite dangerous situation, because problems of objectivity and bias, they're real problems in the media. Like not just in Ukraine, but all over the world. Of course, there are also tendencies to push certain narratives and be supportive and not. I've been asked, would you report on like a corruption scandal that would happen right now? To which I say, of course we would, but so it's kind of like this kind of tricky balance. So when I'm saying that, I wasn't really affected because I'm covering my home, that's also not true. Of course, I make these decisions and I think about it and I keep it in mind. So, we should also be aware of the fact that, these decisions are difficult.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you as well, I'm sure everyone will agree with me, but I think you personally have inspired probably a lot of people, younger people, older people, with the way that you and personally and in general Kiev Independent have been covering the war in Ukraine. But I wanted to ask you actually a little bit about maybe the people that have inspired you or have been inspiring you throughout this time. Maybe people who have been, if you feel comfortable sharing that, people who have been keeping you going and sort of, I guess, like, inspiring figures for you.
That's an excellent question. I mean, I guess for me, something that pushes me is thinking that, well, first of all, okay, let's backtrack a little bit, and if I speak too much, you guys stop me, please. But I think for many of us, this was, this doing whatever it is that we're doing, like working to help Ukraine right now, or reporting, or whatever. This was never a consideration of, whether I should or shouldn't do it. Like I never had another option. It's just a survival instinct. right? Because, you know, your country is under attack. You immediately think of what is it that you do best, and you just do that to the maximum of your ability. And so I don't see us as heroes, you know. I don't all of the recognition we're getting is situational. I mean, there are thousands of young girls like myself, you know, all over the world, in Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Afghanistan, all over the world, you know, doing much more dangerous things and doing, you know, greater things, more courageous things. So I think of them very often. You know, I think of my friends in the Middle East. I think of my friends all over the world who live through conflict zones. And that kind of feeling of solidarity that's, you know, almost unspoken, kind of keeps me going and inspires me and pushes me, right? Because I see that, you know, they've had to do this for so long and they're not stopping, and I've been through this for, you know, like 3 months. So how can I? But at the same time, it's not like there is one specific thing that inspires me. I mean, as I said, it's survival instinct. And it's also, you know, I love my job. There is nothing else I can imagine myself doing. You know, I identify myself as a writer. Actually, that's problematic, but that's another conversation to have too. But you know, I love my job more than anything. You know, maybe other than Ukraine. So I can't imagine doing anything else for a different reason right now.
Part of the reason I love Ukraine and Ukrainians so much, because even very young Ukrainians are extremely, exceptionally brilliant.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And do so much cool stuff. And as I often joke, you might be 21, but 21 or, you know, 30 in Ukrainian years is like 20 plus in
I mean,
average
it's 3
European.
revolutions, a war, an annexation, you know. Of course, we have so many incredible young Ukrainians, especially in the media sphere. I mean, it's incredible. Like, just going into the, you know, the Ukrainian civil society, just tipping into that on social media, you're gonna see so much talent, so
Yeah.
many amazing artists, journalists, people pushing very important narratives. You know, writing about history, writing about culture. All of them, you know, bachelor students, all of them my peers, doing these amazing things. So yes,
Yeah.
I'm very,
But
very proud of that.
if any young Ukrainians, and I see a lot of young Ukrainians as well listening, if anyone listening, one thing that I learned is struggling with imposter syndrome for many years, that you definitely shouldn't have that, and just like say fuck it to it every time you feel it, because we outperform for a reason, because we have to you know, do better. We're expected to do better, and we are there, and we having these platforms for a reason, not by accident. So please just fuck it. It's not a real thing. We shouldn't be succumbing to it.
Yeah. This is why, unfortunately, I sometimes text Maxim, unfortunately, every day, probably on a similar topic. And you repeat this all the time, and I probably should stop doing it. But anyway, we'll record this and play it as a voice note from now on.
Yes, in the mornings.
We actually, Nastya, have a question for you from one of our patrons on Patreon,
Okay.
Ashley. And she wants to know, what does the idea of rebuilding Ukraine mean for you?
I think first of all, that means well, first of all, it means taking all of the money that we can from Russia to do it. That would be very enjoyable to see. That's the only way I see this go. But on a more serious note, I think what I keep on going back to in my mind, thanks to my amazing friends who work in you know, the sphere of cultural heritage preservation, is I think we have to do more work than we've ever done before, with our national identity and with our culture, and with, you know, which means literature, cinema, our museums, because all of this is extremely important, and we now have so many young Ukrainians who are more motivated than ever before to interact with that and to embrace it and to learn it, you know, and to, the people want to listen to Ukrainian music more than ever before. They want to speak Ukrainian. They want to wear vishvankas. And of course, this is all, again, kind of like a defensive survival instinct. But we have to capitalize on that and actually turn that into policy. And I mean, in the best way, not in like hating another's way. I mean, turning that into, investing into good quality Ukrainian cinema so that we can use that for cultural diplomacy abroad. Because we have this unique time when everyone, as my colleague Ilya Ponomarenko says, Ukraine is the most popular country on earth right now. I love when he says that because it's very true. So we have to kind of, make the best of this terrible situation we're in, to, when we win, to kind of channel all of that love around the world that we have for our country, but also internal love into interacting more with our culture, because that's the part that Russia is also very aggressively and very actively attacking, and that's the part that many in the West don't see or don't perceive as important. I mean, we talk about tanks and drones and night goggles, but we should also talk about preserving museum collections, because that's equally important. That's what makes Ukraine Ukraine. And that's also, something that Russia has been trying to steal from us for centuries. So I think rebuilding Ukraine is going to just be that. It's going to be capitalizing on the love that we suddenly have for a country, to interact more with our culture. It's very important.
Yeah. I'll say very millennial thing of me, but I would also add to this rebuilding, decolonizing ourselves and our views of our own history, and maybe spending time more to figure out what kind of lies we've been told by Russian colonial rules for centuries. Rediscovering our voices that were erased, our writers, our artists, reclaiming the arts and culture that was stolen and appropriated as Russian. And maybe also one thing I was thinking today is trying to purge ourselves from hate, because part of the reason I really hate Russia these days is because it filled me with so much hate I've never experienced before. And I'm disgusted because of it. And part of my rebuilding strategy is, after this genocide is over, is to purge that hate, and Russia can have it, and I just don't want to have it in our lives, and I feel like Ukrainians feel the same. Thank you, Nastya, so much for joining us.
Of course.
This is something we tell everyone, that Ukrainian spaces are for Ukrainians to claim. So at any point, if you want to stop by and talk about something you want to talk and amplify things you want to amplify, this is your space to claim,
Thank you.
with other Ukrainians.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming and talking to us. I love meeting people I see online on Instagram and Twitter via Spaces and talking to everyone. So this has been really great. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
And for everyone else, guys, this session is recorded and it's going to be uploaded as a podcast on Apple and Spotify. It's called Ukrainian Spaces Together, so you can check it there. But also, not only subscribe, please, but rate and comment. And don't forget about that this is 100% independent and volunteer, and now listener supported show. So please check out our Ukrainian Spaces Patreon space and become our sponsor. As I told many of you some days ago, if you feel very frustrated with some stupid bullshit that Western media peddled about Ukraine, you can channel that frustration by donating, $5 to our show. And we will be really happy to amplify more Ukrainian voices and decolonize more Ukrainian conversations. I think that's it from me for today, except one thing. Slava Ukraine.
Heroям slava.
I was going to remind you. Thank you, everyone.